Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network. The broadcast shows are for informational and entertainment purposes only. They are not designed to provide listeners with specific personal, medical, or counseling advice. Individuals with a medical issue should always consult their healthcare provider. MS&Me is not responsible for content of individual shows. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own. Enjoy the show.
I'm John Strum, and this is RealTalk MS. It's April 9th, and we have a lot to talk about. Yesterday, I spent the day in Sacramento, the state capital of California. I was part of the National MS Society's State Action Day. And that's a day when MS activists from all over the state meet with our elected representatives and talk about the issues that matter most to people affected by MS. I think that on both a national and state level, there's never been a more important time for our voices to be heard. Our access to health care is under attack. The price of prescription medications that help manage MS continues to rise to even more shocking levels. And it seems that whenever legislative budgets get trimmed, the programs that serve as the social safety nets for families impacted by chronic illness, well, they're the ones that are always on the chopping block. That's why I'll keep reminding you that if you're living with MS in the United States, you should be thinking about being a part of the MS advocacy movement and becoming an MS activist. And if you were with me yesterday in Sacramento, well, you'd already know why you'd want to be a part of this group of truly inspirational MS warriors. It's always my honor to spend time with these folks. And it's especially interesting to be talking about healthcare issues with lawmakers in California now, because the California legislature is watching what's happening to healthcare on a national level, and they're developing the attitude that maybe we can do a better job of it here ourselves. So the California legislative healthcare agenda includes increasing financial assistance to people who are purchasing their health insurance through the insurance marketplace, forcing greater transparency in prescription drug pricing, and even finding the right recipe for single-payer insurance coverage for everyone in the state. Now, all these things aren't going to become law, but it's reassuring to see the healthcare conversation focused on how do we make things better rather than what more can we scale back. And if you're ready to be a part of these conversations with your elected officials, I hope you'll visit the National MS Society's website at nationalmssociety.org and click on Get Involved at the top of the page. I know that when it comes to the important issues that affect my quality of life, I always prefer to be part of those conversations. Choosing to be an MS activist is important, it's impactful, and it's empowering. And while we're talking about my recent travels, last week I was with an amazing group of professionals who are largely responsible for the important services that the National MS Society delivers every day to the almost 1 million people affected by MS here in the United States. Being with this group reminded me of how extraordinary the MS Navigator program is. It's something we've talked about before on the podcast, and if you're relatively new to Real Talk MS, I'll invite you to check out episode 19, where I talk with Kay Julian, who's the National MS Society's Executive Vice President in charge of services, and I think you'll understand why I think the Navigator program is so extraordinary. It was really great to be in the midst of this dedicated group of people and watch them begin to imagine and invent the future. In last week's podcast, we talked about what I think are some exciting and encouraging research results. And when you think about MS research, it's worth considering that the research that's underway right now is going to be a major determinant in the quality of life for people affected by MS in the future. You may not realize it, but the MS Society has already invested more than $1 billion in research funding. And that's remarkable. It also means that the MS Society has to raise a lot of money. And they approach fundraising in a lot of different ways. Of course, there are the high-profile events that everyone is familiar with, like Bike MS and Walk MS. And there are also regional or local fundraising events that are put on by people who are affected by MS. One of those events takes place in Dallas, Texas. It's called Meat Fight. And in less than a decade, Meat Fight has actually grown from a backyard barbecue to its own nonprofit organization that hosts several different fundraising events. They offer some unique programs to people affected by MS, and they've raised more than $1 million for the National MS Society. My guest today is Alice Laussade, the creator and the energy behind Meat Fight, and the very definition of a real MS warrior. But before we get to my conversation with Alice Laussade, there are a few other things that you should know about. The two things that I get the most listener email about are stem cell research and cannabis. So I try to make sure that we circle back to these topics whenever there's news to talk about. And today, well, we have some news to talk about. First, the MS Society in Canada has announced that they're joining with the Canadian Institutes of Health Research in an integrated cannabis research strategy, providing $1.5 million in research funding aimed at better understanding the effect of cannabis on MS and determining how cannabis might best be used to manage MS symptoms. The integrated cannabis research strategy includes partnerships with a number of Canadian health and patient organizations, including the Arthritis Society, Canadian Cancer Society, and the Mental Health Commission of Canada. It's designed to foster more evidence-based research geared toward better understanding the applicability and efficacy of using cannabis to manage MS and other chronic illnesses. Research grant applications are currently being accepted, and if you'd like to check out the details, I'll include a link in today's show notes. As we've said before, stem cell therapy for MS appears to be extremely promising. But the term stem cell therapy is very broad. It covers a lot of ground and, well, it overlooks a lot of details. And scientists are telling us that we're still at a stage where these details need to be better understood. For instance, there are very different approaches to stem cell therapy. In some instances, stem cells might be harvested from a person's bone marrow, or they could be developed in a lab. In some cases, stem cell therapy requires that a person's immune system is fully eliminated. In other cases, it may be partially eliminated. There are clinical trials that are aimed at measuring the effectiveness of stem cell therapy for people living with progressive MS, and other clinical trials are focused on measuring the effectiveness of stem cell therapy for people living with relapsing remitting MS. Early research seems to indicate that people who've been diagnosed with MS for a relatively short period of time are better candidates for stem cell therapy. So these and many more questions need to be answered in the lab before we really understand which approach or approaches to stem cell therapy make the most sense for people living with MS, and which people living with MS will make the best candidates for stem cell therapy. And while these important stem cell research projects are going on, well, there are also the shady operators of so-called stem cell clinics who are offering completely unproven stem cell treatments for virtually every medical condition you can imagine, from arthritis to asthma to heart disease to MS. These clinics have a very simple business plan. They're looking to cash in on people who are desperately seeking solutions to serious chronic health issues. People who are willing to believe the hype that they hear on late-night infomercials and read on websites. I always remind anyone who asks me that if someone truly had a cure for MS, just imagine how long the line outside their door would be. Think of the media coverage they'd receive. They wouldn't need to advertise. They'd be featured in every newspaper, magazine, and network news program in the world. But they're not. And you just have to block out all the noise that these con artists generate, and ask yourself why that is. So this past week, the FDA took a chain of stem cell clinics in Florida to federal court and sent letters to 20 more of these fraudulent clinics advising them that they can either stop promising results that they can't possibly deliver, or they can face a federal government in court. Some of these clinics have been associated with causing several cases of blindness and at least a dozen serious infections. I said it a minute ago, and it's probably worth repeating. Stem cell therapy for MS appears to be very promising. And as research continues, neurologists will better understand what form of stem cell therapy might make the most sense for people living with MS, and which people among everyone living with MS might make the best candidates for stem cell therapy. But the answers to these questions are unknown today. And that's one fact about stem cell therapy that's worth keeping in mind. We often talk about ensuring that everyone has access to health care. And that conversation usually revolves around health insurance. But sometimes access to health care means exactly that, a person's ability to physically access care. And limited public transportation options, health conditions that make driving difficult, and economic barriers are just a few of the factors that can impact a person's ability to access health care. Well, there's a startup in Chicago that's committed to changing that. The company is Kaizen Health, and they're out to tame what can become logistical nightmares associated with non-emergency medical transportation. Whether it's an appointment with your neurologist, a physical therapist, or any other healthcare provider, for a lot of people, just getting there can be much more difficult than simply calling an Uber. So Kaizen Health is partnering with healthcare providers, senior living centers, in-home healthcare providers, and other similar services to make it easier to schedule patient transportation. They've partnered with Lyft, taxis, and other medical transportation companies, and they've actually created a HIPAA-compliant platform that can be accessed through a web browser, or can even be integrated into electronic health record software and care coordinator platforms, so that patient transportation can be selected when a patient is scheduling their appointment. This allows for a care coordinator to choose from a fleet of cars or buses or wheelchair accessible vehicles to lock in the best way to get their patient to their appointment. Kaizen Health was launched by its CEO, Mindy Kniebel. Mindy's aunt was forced to move into a nursing home after being diagnosed with MS at the age of 53 because she couldn't arrange transportation to her physical therapy appointments. About a month after that, Mindy's mother-in-law was diagnosed with breast cancer and found that during her treatment, she couldn't drive to her appointments. Instead, she was dependent upon family members to get her to and from those appointments. Well, necessity truly is the mother of invention, and in this case, Kaizen Health is hoping to not only solve the transportation dilemma, but they're hoping to address other logistical challenges associated with the social determinants of health, including food and even isolation. And they're planning on expanding beyond Chicago, hoping to launch in a couple of dozen new markets this year. Well, personally, I find innovation inspiring. And from my own experiences of getting my wife to all of her medical appointments, I know how tricky arranging for non-medical wheelchair accessible transportation can be. So I'm hoping that we'll be hearing more from Kaizen Health as they work to remove the logistical roadblocks to accessing healthcare. I want to tell you about an opportunity for you to participate in MS research, and you can do it from the comfort of your own home and even be compensated for your time. Researchers at the Kessler Foundation are looking for people with relapsing remitting MS to participate in an online study that's investigating how someone living with MS makes decisions regarding their medications and their treatment. The study is open to men and women with relapsing remitting MS who have been recommended a disease-modifying therapy by their doctor and are still presently on the treatment, never started the treatment, or discontinued the treatment. The study will last about 2 hours, and you'll be asked to complete a detailed online survey consisting of questionnaires that will ask about disease symptoms, medications and treatments, health-related behaviors and beliefs, personality, and memory. Participants will also be asked to give permission to investigators to obtain information about their MS, such as disease course, duration, and level of disability from their MS doctor. If you're interested in participating in this study, you can contact Michael DiBenedetto at the Kessler Foundation, and I'll include Michael's email and phone number in today's show notes. Like an awful lot of people in Texas, Alice Laussade enjoys barbecue. After her brother Jim was diagnosed with MS, Alice turned a backyard barbecue get-together into Meat Fight. And today, Meat Fight has grown into one of the largest MS fundraising events in the country. In a moment, we'll meet one of my favorite MS warriors, Alice Laussade. They say that the best things in life are free, but when it comes to MS research, the best research takes funding. So organizations like the National MS Society rely on fundraising from a wide range of different sources. Some of those fundraising efforts are held all across the country, like Walk MS or Bike MS, and some have a much more local type of flavor. Take Meat Fight, for instance, an event that feels like it could only happen in Dallas, Texas. My guest today is Alice Laussade. Alice's brother was diagnosed with MS in 2010, and Alice decided to take what was basically a backyard party and turn it into an opportunity to raise funds for the National MS Society. Welcome to the podcast, Alice.
Thank you guys for having me.
Well, for sure. So tell us, what is Meat Fight and how did it get started?
So Meat Fight started in my backyard. It was just a barbecue competition and just a party that my husband and I threw for our friends. We had some really, really good brisket at a friend's house one day, and we thought, that was awesome. How do we get to eat that food again, but without having to leave the comfort of our own couch? And so we decided to set up a competition among our friends, and we had brisket and sausage and pulled pork and a wild card category. And we made these trophies that are just beer cans that I spray painted gold, and I super glued a pig to the top of them. And then I wrote in Sharpie Meat Fight on them. And we had this little competition, and it was really fun. And then later that year, my brother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and we decided that in order to raise our minimum fundraising for the Bike MS that we were going to do, that we would turn Meat Fight, this little party, into a backyard fundraiser. And so that's how it all started.
So that was in 2010. Here we are in 2019. Tell us a little about how Meat Fight has evolved over the years.
Yes. So since that time, Meat Fight has gone from a little backyard party and grown into a 501c3 nonprofit that hosts multiple events in a year that are fundraisers for both the National MS Society and for our programs that we've created that help people living with MS to participate in endurance events of varying degrees of difficulty. We have raised over $1 million for the National MS Society through our bike team. And our events, host up to between 800 and 1,000 people every year. And the most recent Meat Fight singular event raised $225,000 for the cause and for these programs that we've created that help people with equipment in order to take on endurance events.
Well, that's That's beyond amazing. And you've mentioned Bike MS a couple of times. I know that part of what happens at Meat Fight, I feel like saying what happens at Meat Fight stays at Meat Fight, but quite the opposite. I'd love for everybody to know about this. I know there's something called Meat Bike. What is that all about?
Yeah. So when my brother got the diagnosis, the first thing he wanted to do was go out and tackle the Bike MS, all 150 miles over 2 days. And he wanted us to do that with him. And so, we all bought bikes and we kind of did our best out there. And, as we were crossing the finish line, he saw that finish line tent that they have, at every event that helps people living with MS, be comfortable in the hot weather, especially here in Texas. And there were several people living with MS in the tent cheering, super excited at the finish line for all the riders. And my brother turned to me and said, I think that's really cool that they're there, but wouldn't it be even cooler if they could have this experience of crossing this finish line just like I did? Because research is now showing that exercise helps tremendously with symptoms and such things for people living with MS. And he was feeling that. He knew that because he was working out in a different way, doing these kinds of endurance exercises, that it's helping him. And he wanted to help other people do that. And at the time, I said, well, yeah, that's a great idea. Everybody should be out here if they could be, but bikes are expensive, equipment's expensive, and especially somebody with this diagnosis, like they've got bills, they've got other things that on their mind. This is buying a road bike can't be a priority. And so he said, well, what if we just done a program that did that, or if we talked to the MS Society about whether or not they have a program that does that. So we talked to the MS Society, and they did not have a program that was doing that at the time. And so we decided that, we were already at this point raising funds. We had just had our first public event and had raised $20,000 there. And so we thought, well, what if with the next event, we put some money towards some bikes for people and some equipment? And we just started a program. And so that's kind of how it started. In 2013, we just started raising money for this bike program we hoped would take off in Dallas. And through the first year of that, we gave 10 bikes, and we had 10 riders with us in Dallas. And it was really, really cool. And since that date, it's grown into a nationwide program. And today, I'm announcing that we will have given our 209th bike nationwide. In the last year of the program, we gave 79 bikes. It's starting to really take off the more people hear about it. And so that's really exciting for us.
That is really, really exciting. It's an incredible program. I guess I have a little bit of a personal response to this because prior to her diagnosis, my wife was an avid cyclist. She would ride 40 miles every single day, just as part of her morning workout. So I know that, she'd be all about this. And I just think it's wonderful. It's really wonderful. You've mentioned something that I've actually talked about before on the podcast, and that is that, when people living with MS are active, they do themselves a whole lot of good. Physical activity is good for everybody, but they're finding that people living with MS get some real benefit from it in terms of being able to delay disease progression and better mitigate some of the symptoms. So I know that one of the things you guys are doing, yet another project. I don't know where you find the time for all this, but I'm so happy that you do. Something else you're involved in is called Project 13. So tell us about Project 13.
Yeah, so that's another thing that's my brother's fault. So he decided to, after diagnosis, start taking on Ironman competitions. And so he was also feeling that those were just amazing, and he wanted to get more people living with MS involved with those events. And so as the Meat Bike program started to grow, and we sort of started to see just the happiness that it brought to people that were getting to be part of this new community we were creating, he wanted us to do more. And so we, raised some more money, and we started another program that funds people to participate in the Galveston 70.3 Ironman. For that, we provide all the equipment one might need. So wetsuit, bike, anything, the kit that you run in, and also 3 months of coaching or more from our pro triathlete Ironman champion coach, who's awesome, Kelly Williamson. And then, they get registration and all those things too. And what we're seeing with that is just a real community building with people. And it's the same kind of feeling that the Meat Bike program gives people, just sort of on an even more epic level. I get the question a lot, so can people living with MS do these things? And I can say absolutely. Again, we've seen with 209 riders now how it makes an epic difference in the way people feel. We know research is showing this, but we're seeing it firsthand year after year with people who take on these events with us and take activity as something that they prioritize. When they do that and they get that exercise in daily, they start to feel better. We've seen it over and over and over again. And my favorite thing personally is that, I've gone to a lot of these bike days when people receive their bikes. And when we're going through the application process, people, kind of tell us their story. It's always optional that they tell us about their diagnosis if they'd like to, how these things, kind of transpired. And people usually are really open about that. And we talk through all that kind of stuff. And we get to the bike day and they talk about kind of their nervousness. And usually I hear a lot about current symptoms that people are experiencing and things like that. And then they get to the point of the day where it's time to test ride that bike. And they get on the bike and they take it out for a spin and they come back and there's just this flood of emotion and happiness. And after that, sometimes I get the opportunity to go on a bike ride around the lake with them, And when I see them like a week later and I'm talking to them about like, okay, yeah, how's the bike going? How's it treating you? The conversation is completely different. We are now talking about bike speed, miles per hour, miles ridden, beautiful bluebonnets that they saw that are already blooming, birds in the sky that they saw when they were riding. And it's a completely different shift in conversation and focus. And I think that's another thing that this program gives people. We go through our days and they can become very focused on symptoms and things like that. And when you get this bike or you get this task of focusing on a half Ironman to participate in and to complete it, you got something else to think about and to focus on. And you get to focus on your positive gains. And I think that really has created a cool community with this group of people. The more our bikers talk to each other and the more our Project 13ers talk to each other, we hear from people that this is it's not a support group. It's different than that, but it's a group of like-minded individuals. And they think that they're alone out there. You think you're the only one who's exercising and feeling better because of it. And when you get to be in this group, you realize you're not alone. You're not a unicorn. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I would say it is very cool. Now, when I look at Meat Fight, I think I understand where the name came from. And when I look at Meat Bike, I get that. Where did the number 13 come from in Project 13?
Yes. So the name Project 13 comes from a tradition in endurance events. So when you participate in any kind of race, you get assigned a number, right? And you don't get to decide what number you're going to be. The race director just, sends a number attached to your name. And so, if you happen to get the number 13, the tradition that athletes do is that they flip that number upside down when they wear it to sort of dump out all the bad luck that would be associated with the number 13, right? And so Jim's idea in naming the group Project 13 is that we would take on 13 athletes living with multiple sclerosis to participate in this Ironman 70.3. And part of our logo is that 13 upside down, because this diagnosis is not something that you choose, but this is something that we're going to work through together, and we're going to dump out the bad luck, and we're going to take it day by day. And yeah, so that's kind of where the name came from for that organization.
I get it. And I think you guys are doing a masterful job of turning the number 13 upside down in all of life. So really hats off to that. When is your next meet fight event happening this year?
So our next event is in August, and I believe it's the middle of August. We're sort of setting the date right now, and it is actually called the Meet Fight 1K. It's a different event that we do. It's our joke on a fun run. So, we talk all this big game about all this endurance stuff. But the other side of our organization is just food events that are crazy. And so at this one, we get a large open field, and we fill that field with 40 food and beverage stations, beer, whiskey, all sorts of barbecue, of course, burgers, tacos. And if you can eat or drink at 12 or more of those stations during the day, then you get a finisher medal. And it's a really fun event that looks like an endurance event, but really it's just a chance to get everybody together, raise some good money for the cause, and have a blast, and make it look like online when you take a picture of yourself with your runner bib and your finisher medal from the Meet Fight 1K. It looks like you actually participated in some kind of event that day, when really all you did was just have a bunch of fun. And so that one's in August. And then just before that, we're going to have a meat raffle, where we're going to do just a big, huge table of all these different kinds of meats. And for like $5 or $10, you can come to this brewery, hang out with us, and we'll raffle off all kinds of different steaks and things like that. And then in November is when our big meat fight event happens. That'll be the second Sunday in November. I think it's the 11th this year, or the 10th. And at that event is where we have our big auction. And at the end of that event, we do a dedicated give to meat bikes, where we kind of ask the crowd if anybody can donate a bike package. And each bike package costs us $1,000. That gets a road bike, helmet, shoes, shorts, water bottles, cages, a flat kit, all the things you might need to start riding a bike. It also, through that program, we also give recumbent bikes and hand cycles. Those cost us a little bit more, but we always, stick with that baseline. $1,000 gets somebody on a bike. And last year at the event, we were able to raise, I believe, like $67,000 in just that dedicated give for bikes at that moment. And that's something really special to see too. So if anybody out there is in Dallas, Texas, or in the area and wants to come to a meet fight, we've also got people who fly in now. You should come. Not only is it amazing barbecue from the best chefs in Dallas, and amazing desserts and all other kinds of beverages. But it's also a really, really cool thing to see.
Well, it certainly sounds like it is. And how can people connect, find out more about Meat Fight, Project 13, all the work that you're doing? Where can they find you?
If you'd like to find out more about Meat Fight, you can go to meatfight.com. So that's MEATFIGHT.com. You can email me, Alice, at meatfight.com. And we've got applications. If you're a person who's living with MS, who's interested in applying to take on the Meat Bike Challenge, you can apply online. If you are interested in taking on the Galveston 70.3, that's also online. We also have opportunities in Project 13 for people to take on the Dallas Marathon in December. And if you're a person who's interested in donating to the program, you can also do that through the website. or email me. Again, those packages are $1,000 each. We buy every piece of equipment that we give to other people. We don't get those things donated from large, organizations at this time. So any $5, $1, all of it helps. And all of our ticket prices to all of our events, 100% of those go either to the National MS Society or to these programs. They don't go anywhere else. So if you buy a ticket to an event, you're supporting us through these programs as well.
Well, Alice Laussade, thank you for using what I can only describe as your superpowers as an MS warrior to create these new programs and to really fund hope for so many people. And thanks for talking with me today.
Well, thanks again for having us. And we really hope that we see you guys, eat some brisket with us sometime soon.
Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk MS. If you haven't yet, I invite you to visit the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store and download the free Real Talk MS app for your iOS or Android smartphone or device. It's the easiest way for you to stay connected to the podcast. You'll never miss an episode, and the app allows me to share all sorts of bonus content with you in the weeks and months to come. My name is John Strum. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.